Okay, well, what's happening is I am going back to my walk. I am charging my phone up, boiling a little more water, and making a protein drink. And unfortunately, when I'm charging my phone, I can't keep track of my mileage, but we already did about 3 or 4 miles. I've got enough in here. So right now, I think I've got a few more scoops of this one left, which is a mixture of the, I don't even think I have an entire scoop left. Yesterday, I had the last remnants of the ISO 100, which was amazing. It's the Fruity Pebbles. This is a mixture of the vanilla ISO Pure that has full nutrient profile and the chocolate brownie ISO HD by BPI. As I mentioned, BPI, I think I have like half a scoop in here, so I'm going to go a little bit more. Yeah, I've got almost a full scoop. I should be saving this for my custard. That custard is very filling, and it's a great way. I'm going to just toss this over with the recycling. So we got all the recycling there, and those canisters can be a pain in the ass after they are no longer in use. But I'm going to probably do a 3-mile walk without recording it. At a good pace, that's going to be about an hour. We've got a decent charge on the so I do about 8. Might be able to get a little creative since I'm not holding on to my my phone either. I don't know if anyone else does this, but when I have my earbud case on me fully charged, I can typically I would have like blended that up. So I just kind of get into it doing this basic walk, and sometimes I'll put my arms overhead. I'm obviously drinking protein while I walk. Not only is there something to that, but I have a long history where I did protein fasting for, it was almost pushing on like 10 years that I did it on and off. Where I would quite literally live on protein at certain times, and then I would carb load. I'd base everything on a super compensation cycle of carb loading. I am thirsty. There's no other water around at the moment, so we're going to wait for that to boil. We're going to hit the set minimum number of 10 miles. I thought that I'd be doing some resistance training, but I am really trying to. I noticed that after my carb load last night, I woke up much leaner, but I'm still holding quite a bit of fat in some areas. So what I'm doing right now is there's this depletion that really starts with a load, and then it goes toward a depletion cycle. So I'm doing it. I'm doing the action of it, and then at times I will do reverse walking, where I'll just do reverse walking. I'll go back into a reverse walk. Now, if I'm to place my arms overhead and lean back, right, it gets my core involved. And I have issues with an anterior pelvic tilt. Some people have the posterior tilt where your ass sticks out, you know. Females you can picture the body type, and it leads to other postural deviations and issues. So I kind of lean back, and there's the core. And all of a sudden, I feel a stretch in the hip flexors, right? And the reason I'm so uncoordinated right now is because I've been walking. This is my 10th day of walking 16 miles in a day, 13 miles in a day, over and over again, back and forth. And what I do is I feel, and I know that there is some foundational basis of research for this, but I feel that if you tinker through the day, doing 3 or 4 miles at a time, sometimes you're only going to be doing like 2 miles at a time, right? In a given time frame. We're going to let that boil a little bit because you've got to boil something for like 2 minutes before you can kill those microorganisms, bacteria. Yeah. We're going to let it rest and then boil it again. I'm not condoning drinking tap water, but my benefits don't kick on until next week or 5 days from now. Around the 8th, actually the morning of the 9th, is when I'll get a Walmart delivery. I usually make my order around the 8th. And again, I feel like I'm completely being a hypocrite and contradicting myself because whey protein for me was also a way of getting away from eating animals, right? Like in a sense, even though it's very cruel and you could call it outright theft, but we can foreseeably get into an area where we are engineering superior protein and amino acids without using an organic base, right? That is superior, that works. And I even believe that soon there's going to be nanoids as mechanofactors, if you will, for lack of a better. But the reason I use that is insulin growth factors are going to be a part of this mimetic technology where substrates can be stored within us and utilized, right? And this gets into areas of Neuralink and other things, but much more in depth where communications can be sent off, like Levin's research, right, to say an anthropobot modality, and that they can work, an army of these can work to actually transport and help with biosynthesis to where you don't have to eat it all, to where a Neuralink type information system could communicate the release through nanorobots, right? Or a type of cybernetic communication networking system to where when your blood sugar changes, when there's an increased energy output demand, that you will never eat or never consume or never digest 1 calorie beyond what you require, and that satiety is something that you can just, so the ghrelin is heavily responsible for this, but then there's like comfort, the feeling of comfort and comfort foods, right? So appetite and appetite suppression not being a factor. So there's no reason to suppress an appetite that's not there, right? That is to be able to release Clotho, as it's referred to. You have this anti-aging hormone or gene expression, and to be able to locally inspire biogenesis and cell transmission, right? And to actually fix and re-engineer RNA on the spot. So it gets into authentication. It's like, if you're capable of doing this, so the pronouncement would be, you have to be pretty damn important. But what if the technology was done in such a way where there was I'm not going to use the term socialized, but let's use that for no better word, where you have a moneyless, cashless society that where technology, you could go technocratic, but we're a technology-based society that is aware of higher truths, is not exploiting the people within the society, but celebrating life in the sense of, let's prolong it as long as we possibly can, right? And let's even go to the point where, from a complete and total Pangloss positivity, to say, whoever's here, whatever you've done, it can be fixed. We can find the construct of psychological deviation, fix those areas, even if they are represented in certain error codes, i.e. somebody's depressed. It's been found in a particular gene expression that, the 11th chromosome, right? That there are copies, too many copies, that influence this behavior, and that existentially modifying oneself and, dropping all the weight, that was just the current modern day, when we talk about inhibitors of greater gene expression that would lead on to unlocking more intellectual pursuits, which are present as well, but that there is an error code, that there is a factor that exists there that needs to be looked at and modified. So we get into the area of the metaverse, authentication, identity, information, informational transduction, communication. And what the stage that we're in right now is integration, information integration, where you saw institutions that existed, and in those institutions there were people, and the people in the institutions were going through experience, and the experience that they were going through was something that was regarded from a principal protocol. And what distinguished all the way from the name of that institution and the location was a certain matriculation done by constituents, right? You could get into Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée touches on a lot of the subjects, if not all, because identity, right? Like Close Encounters, his character, so the metaverse is right now, quite literally, if you look at Lex Friedman and you look at Mark Zuckerberg, and they spent that whole episode where he had on the VR headset, and it was showing what really is, by comparison, a crude representation of a recreation of this world with more operations, more possibilities, more potentials in a given space. Like, it's still taking planet Earth, it's still taking the construct of planet Earth and time space, but then it's putting where there is empty space, one becomes the purveyor and the builder of their own universal model. That there's a universal mechanism that we are all building through our own toe, through our own theory of everything. And that what I'm doing right now is a part of my own metaverse, that I have a blog, which could be looked at as a website, though I'm not generating any money. And what's happening right now through a social hierarchy, through a networking system, is finding value in the information, finding like putting this channel along with AI is putting this channel along with all other channels that are pertinent to the information and the discourse that's occurring in a real-time event. And then it is establishing a value system, right, that is based on information. Like, in other words, there will always be a time on some level where those with higher degrees, those who have gone through the channels of traditional education, will be regarded in a way where they will be celebrated as the establishment, right, of information, and thereby the matriculation, the spreading, and the teaching of this information to other colleges, right? The lectures that they have where they're communicating with one another, and then there's a trickle down, that we are not living in a populist movement any longer where exclusive barred networking systems can place precedence over pervading information. In other words, it's kind of like the whole idea of Lion King, Jesus, the story of Jesus. It's like you have the slave king. In the sense, we are all the slave king. We are able to express, process, do our own matriculation here in this forum, at this event, in space-time, in a particular time with a particular time stamp, and that whether anyone watches it now or not is irrelevant. The information is part of the archive, like the halls of Amante from the Emerald Tablets, that the archival information exists, whether it's validated or not by those who esteem themselves as authoritarian, the authors of certain books, when held in certain validity or esteem. Those who wrote books with certain information that was available at the time, the actual information that is being expressed is weighed against what information is being expressed by any given average Joe. In other words, there is no denial of this cybernetic system as being part and parcel to the natural display, the natural outcome, the nature. There's nothing natural about nature, as I've said. The nature of times, communication, people, and events, right? You get into identity, you get into unique identity. And the fact that you don't have to buy or purchase unique identification, that you have already been given this, and that is the gift, right? That is the gift. And even more so, that the gift cannot be denied. Like, sure, culturally, you're cancel cultured and thought of in a certain way. Sure, through cancel culture and through the process of things that you might have actually done, and expressions of, like I say, that's just the road I came in on. Whatever you've done in your life, that was a learning process. When we come together through unification, we try to find fixes. When we reach a place where those fixes aren't guesswork or guesstimations, but they are an exact identification of information and where it's housed in the genome. And this leads back into Mark Zuckerberg, CRISPR. You know, like I said, I did a lot of rideshare. I did it around the Bay Area. I would find myself in the most fascinating conversations with people that I would pick up from Salesforce or from private institutions, medical institutions. And because of the questions I was asking, or just ironically, things that I was studying at the time, I would have the most bizarre conversations. After a while, when I wouldn't compartmentalize and delineate myself, like I'm not going to become someone else just because I'm picking up a prostitute in the middle of the night, I'm not going to suddenly bar myself from thinking about what I think about and being who I am. Like I'm going to talk about a lot of the subjects that I'm talking about here, and you would be amazed at how people that you would think don't think this way are 100% looking out, like they're stuck inside this construct. They're looking out and they're trying to find a way out of the isolation. The subject of free will, wow. I wish I would have recorded a lot of that, because looking at theories of everything, looking at Toe, yeah, that's really cool seeing Jesse Michaels and Kurt Jamungal talking about this. Two young dudes who have a great education, but are so inspired and so perspicaciously ignited, right? So I'm on cruise control. I'll do this and I'll close my eyes. Like I said, years ago, when I was a porter valet in my 20s, I would run like 10 plus miles a night going to get cars, and I would micro sleep while I'm running. And I was also studying a lot of things way back then. It's always been, like I had started studying Joseph Campbell and codependency and just higher thought and mind when I was a teenager, really going into these areas. This is in the 1980s. I never did get too far into the ufology, even though I've seen orbs. I've seen those things. In fact, I watched these black orbs for at least 25 minutes where I am here on the Monterey Bay with a friend of mine at that time who was a Stanford marine biologist graduate student that was working at, God, what's that called? I think it's called Stanford Research Center. He used to let me go over to the little tiny private beach. When I say tiny, we're talking about really small, and just hang out there, right? I've been one of those strange people in the past that just gets along with somebody, or when you meet someone that you think you knew in another lifetime or whatnot, or you have this feeling. And I really chalk that up to memetics again. And when I use the term memetics, I'm talking about a code, a strand of informational transduction of possibly where you end and where I begin, or where I begin and where you end, right? That what we identify as individuality and what we become greedy for, like Gollum with Lord of the Rings, it's like you think that because this outside force or this outside agency, i.e. cymatics, is telling you who you are and what you have to be, and that you have to stay within this false parameter. But once you say, fuck that, I'm me and I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want, right? Well, I fight authority. Authority always wins, right? You see that authority ain't going anywhere either. And now you've reached a different level of authority. And the more that you refute society, that is, you cast away any law, right? And yeah, it does get into law or Lamb or Aleister Crowley's studies on this as well. And even though that was seen in such a, let's just say metaphysical sort of way, where it was an abstract, right? Where you're not getting directly into the discourse, the pragmatism of looking at, I guess the best analogy is to go back to Black's law dictionary, right? And to say that most of those, if you go back to the original source, were spells. And that they weren't just spells, they were spells done under the guise of witchcraft. And that they weren't only witchcraft, they were based around binding systems and binding spells. And that they were spells that were done to set certain parameters of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, right? Truths, evident truths that are either held as total truth or refuted. That the individual in the metaverse can be seen as a wallet code or a unique code address that identifies a particular value, a particular quantity, at a particular place, in a particular time, under a particular contract, with particular exchanges, specific exchanges, right? So when we use the word particular, we could also replace that with perpendicular, where you see the 90-degree angle. You see the energy system. You see John Dee's monad as a reference to everything that is going on now and where it is going as a codified system of a one, but the one cannot be counted from the outside because there is no one outside. There is no, in other words, in Hinduism, it's the one self, right? It's the one self. That how can you call yourself a self just because you feel right now like you have to fart or you have a tickle? How can you say that that identifies you as a self? There's no argument there. You're not a self. I'm not a self. But once you get to the place of completion, that is through the probability code, you have been shown to have developed and completed, right? Within the grand scope of what is and what is not, like the false mathematics, false religion, false sciences. When you become the Rosetta Stone that displays whether or not something is false or not, you become very powerful. Like, and powerful in the sense of you can still be broke. In fact, you'll probably be kicked out of every place, every club, and people will start looking at you with big eyes. Like, they will look at you as if you're evil, even though they are taking part in a ritual and pretend to be unaware of it, but there they are doing it. And so from a more technical point of view, you are taking the completion, right, of who you are, right? And you are a part of the field around you, and you are igniting as an incendiary measure the completion of everything around you. You have probably been this person at certain times in your life where you antagonize or you even just juxtapose. You become antithetical, and all that would happen is just like mundane and trivial arguments. You might be attacked at times out of the blue. You don't even know why. Everyone's attacking you every place that you go. because you are not giving way to, you are not letting go of knowing who you are and knowing who you are in a place and time. And you'll start to look down at the time. You'll start to look at numbers that reoccur to you randomly. You'll start to realize that you are inspired and that nothing can take away that inspiration. And then that is the place where people are faced with, when you have a false ego or you have the egoic self, that is what the pentagram represents. It says, oh, you don't have to go through this process. This is an earthen altar. And come here, baby. Let me soothe you. Let me, like Matrix. Let me give you a chocolate chip cookie, right? But I don't know how to turn on live show. Okay. So that woman, being the oracle, she was giving that cookie like, are you going to take the cookie? Are you going to eat the cookie? Are you going to see the cookie as something that you can vacillate on and you can say, this is a damn good cookie? Or like when you take the blue pill, this is a damn good steak. Well, my friends, that's what we're all doing. We live in a time where we're doing that, but it's not the end. Like the difference is that you can reach this place where you're hitting Starbucks at 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. every single morning. You're drinking the drink that you love, right? And you're a part of this faulty network in society. But in your truth, after you've had your Starbucks, after you've done that, right? After you've gone through the proletariat strife, or even during, it's the thoughts and the truth about who you are as you're going through the actionable deed. And Matrix doesn't get into that. It doesn't get into your intrinsic self. It doesn't get into the intrinsic aspects of what you're thinking, who you really are, and what you're really doing. Because while you're smiling, the better you get at this multifarious multiplicity, and it wants to see you as a being that is incapable of multiplicity. It wants to see you as a being that sees yourself in such a shallow and superficial way that you virtually have no dimension. But when you are at work, when you are at play, when you are doing anything, when you're going to Starbucks, there's a thought, there's a person that is 100% removed from the ridiculous, mundane tasks that take place in society at large, right? And you realize it doesn't take long. You can go halfway around the world and it looks like you're at the same fucking strip mall. Yeah, somebody might be talking to you with an Australian accent, but they're saying the same mundane bullshit back to you. But there's a deeper, higher truth behind everyone and everything. And it is pretty rare that anyone even knows that they're going about doing these sort of occult rituals. And you'll start to see it happen. And I got into that a little bit because I've been talking to a friend and I go, there's 5 people, isn't there? 5 people standing against you. 5 people pointing their fingers and accusing you. And you are being put on this earthen altar. And eventually, these people will surround you as if they are in a circle. Like when you go to meetings, right? Like form follows function, function into form. And you become the sacrifice. When you just display yourself as purity, you become the lamb. You're walking into their ritual. They don't even know what they're doing, but the first thing that they do is they impurify all relationships. I'm not just picking this out of the air. This is something that I've been looking at, studying, and validating everywhere that I go and everything that I do. This is 100% part and parcel to union, grace, salvation, and going back into the pure truth, clearing yourself out, and going back through the process with purity, that you can transcend time and space with your mind in motion. Because what you'll find is Your mind is not working alone, that the spirit takes over, that the action that I'm talking about becomes so burdensome and so heavy, especially if you're doing other things, right, throughout the day. But where most people just give up is, I can't study. Like, I've heard people say that, like, I can't study all this shit. Like, you like, I work, or I have a family, I have bills. I can't just, and it's like, well, a lot of people in the Bible that lost their way, Job is a really good example. A lot of people that looked like they were living lives and they were busy themselves, they went through this metanoia, this experience where they fell on their knees, and it became undeniable that that's why some of the greatest men through history, if not all, in one way or another, in the end, showed a complete and total reverence toward God. And hear me out on this. God is not the name. God is a reference. God is a reference for the unexplained, but the unexplained of something that we couldn't factor this into the equation, that this is the missing source of force. We leave out where the energy comes from. We want to study, 0 point energy and, dark matter and look at piezoelectrical fields and the Thunderbolt project, the electric universe. But to really get to the fundamental aspect of where does it come from, is it just a perpetuating energy machine where energy itself never runs out, right? And it sort of goes into this bit file information of condensing and storing, almost like a battery. It goes beyond a static energy notion, and that maybe that's what mass, like Sirius A, Sirius B, why the mass is so great, measured so great in those areas, right? That the density of mass is so you get into star mass, you get into different levels of star mass. And if you're talking about this, you can't get away from Astronomy Magazine 2016, October 2016, where it talks about the reoccurring, right? And I'm sure there's a variance here, 13, 14 elements that come from star birth. Gold is one of them, right? And the products on display, the things that culminate from this plasma Kelvin experience that only thermodynamics only hints at. And thermodynamics only hint at the perfect crystalline structure at theoretical absolute zero, right? That when all entropy halts, right? So it's like, okay, you have a decent explanation for the field, but then you get into Zoroastrian's law, fourth proposed law, that really hints at something else, because it's kind of like, where does the energy go? It just keeps making more spheres. It just keeps making more bubbles, right? And these bubbles can pop in and out of space, and that's it. That's the end of it. And it's kind of like, no, do you understand what I'm talking about? You are the creator of a universal model, a universal construct, and the paintbrush is whatever is in front of you and whatever you have access to. Like right now, I am creating a universe. I am creating a world. I'm creating a world system because I'm expressing the system that I'm living under right now. Now, this gets into kind of a multiverse theory where you go, yeah, but you're living under a government, the confines of a government restriction. And it's like, whether or not that is reality, that seems to be the case, right? But am I, as an individual, as a so-called said individual, and my number, who I represent, right? Am I taking up the same time in space time in a theoretical, entirely different dimension, where I am the constant, right? Where the individual is the constant that brings substance to meaning to the thing, the item at hand, and it allows the item at hand to be fueled. When we start to see that becomes more and more prevalent, that there requires participation, that there requires a sacrifice, if you will, the sacrifice of self and selfhood for a theoretical abstract ego, of an ego that is thought beyond you, that is greater than you. And that's what the inverted pentagram and the earthen altar is about, right? So you could easily see it and mistake it as something grand, as something great, that it is building up. But it relies on samsara. It relies on further sacrifice. It relies on the sacrifice of the self. And when you come face to face with the 6 spinning spheres, you know, the basis to Metatron's cube, phi and the Fibonacci sequence, when you see that as the representation, it's saying, no, God is quite real. And you, God expressed through you with a healthy ego, you become self-reliant. You become the unit of one. And when others are doing the same thing, you're the boss, you're in control. And that's what everyone is deviating from. If we were doing that through such self-efficacy and autonomy, and this gets into the dialogue between Gorgias and Socrates that Michael Segru talks about. Michael Segru, in some of his last lectures before he passed away this last month, I think exactly a month ago, you know, was studying the Republic, right? He was studying the discourse between Gorgias and Socrates, and Gorgias taking things as far as we do today, where it's like liberty. It's like, it's ironic that we would have an entire nation that is based on liberty and liberation, and we would be going into the folly that we are, when this discourse, this lesson, and this exchange of how important autonomy is, right, was so prevalent then, and I'm sure far before then, as much as it is today. It's the truth that is evident and self-evident. So, metaverse, multiverse, authentication, becoming who and what you are, proving to the entire system just by your own development that you don't have to learn these ridiculous trades that might come through the novelty of a government or a system that's based on whims, that's based on trends, right? That these truths being evident, self-evident, anytime and any place, come down to fundamental principles and principle application. And if you are being kept from that, but you are meaning to practice that, and that's what Esoteric Principles of Light is. It's the study of these principles, the use of these principles. And a lot of times, you will not be able to do this, especially when you try to do it in public. Like, have you ever defended the purity that is being sacrificed by people around you just with little jokes? Like, you have the little girl or the little boy who's doing something that's obviously a deviation from a pure state of being. They saw something, or maybe a voice is talking to them, or maybe they're getting an inclination and a feeling. And that is what we are supposed to be doing. We are supposed to be protecting that within them, within ourselves, right? And the salvation comes when we can do that. And there's a transcendence that occurs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we're no longer living off a so-called host program that's acting like it is in charge, like it is the protocol. Then you get to this fact where it's like, was all this heinousness, all this talk of demons over countless periods of time, right? Tempting you with a cookie, tempting you with an apple, was it just to show the depth and the lives and the deaths and the war? Was it just to show you the depth of, look, you're still alive. You're still a soul. You came to the end and you thought you died. You thought you reached final precipice. You thought you reached the end of yourself. And yet here you are. Here you are through this amnesia where through the amniotic fluid, you were reborn through the pillars. You have forgotten all past selves that is no longer relevant. And here you are still alive, right? So how evil were the most evil deeds, right? And you could say they're pretty damn evil. Little kids are being eaten. Little kids are, adrenochrome harvesting is the thing. Cannibal's kitchen is a thing. And when you look throughout lifetimes, especially when you get into the Gnostic areas of, where the elementals are brought up, and even more so, Esoteric Buddhism as an on-running religion and theme that led into Hinduism, Buddhism, and other areas that we only, in other words, modernize the traditions of the archetype, right? And that the story becomes so important to tell over and over again about our salvation and the fact that this can't be removed from technology, that it's part and parcel to it, that it is part of the unique identity in a codified system. But through transcendence, there's no longer a need of a number, a system, a category, a religion, a government, a false straw man name. That transcendence and salvation mean that you are liberated from this and therefore autonomous. And that's the only time that liberty itself, like this dialogue between Gorgias and Socrates, could ever be possibly present, though it isn't, because it's not like you reach the state of liberty and therefore you are liberated from being accused of any sin, because you're just a self and you're all right eating the cookie, living in the machine, and doing what you do. Because let's face it, you're so cool. You're so complete. And then you realize after a time, and maybe it takes time to do this, now you're an old man. Now you're an old woman. Not so cool anymore, not feeling so cool, not feeling those oats anymore, right? And there's a transitory notion. There's a direct transition of these energies and what you really are, what you really represent, the fundamental principles that you live by. And more so, whether or not you are haunted by the acts of your deeds, right? And trying to escape them, and everything that you do is an escapist technique, a magician's technique, if you will. And that eventually the tricks become old, and whether or not you're seen a certain way, you don't give a shit after a while. I mean, imagine the conjecture, the postulation of the Sumerians where people would live thousands upon thousands of years. Imagine how freaking bored you'd get then, right? But when you're talking about traveling through space and dimensions, that might change a little bit. But the amniotic fluid, the amnesia that we go through the samsara, birth, death, and rebirth cycles, it becomes ridiculous and mundane if there isn't a transcendence that eventually would occur, where all of these characters that are talked about in a hierarchical sort of way become a display of who we are, that those constants and those personalities and the overall persona of God's not a name. God infers a way, a title to an undeniable energy that is already that is this transcendence. And like I say, it's not just coming face to face with evil that puts you in this place, but it's the understanding that, wow, I can't go back to the life that I lived at one time. I can't even go back to remembering myself. I'm in transition to become something else. What like this has been said, like, what have I become? It's what am I becoming? And that's the best question that you can ask yourself in the world. And that puts you in direct dialogue with the true self, right? Where your false self begins to ask the questions of the true self, only to realize that the true self was mirroring off of itself the entire time in order to see the self. And it gets back into the areas of monad, right? That you have this complete and total unit of measure, that it can't be replaced, that it can't be disregarded, and that no matter how you see that G, whether that G represents God, geometry, all the other ways that G is represented and expressed, that it becomes a mark, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You see the seven. You see the harmonics of seven, right? You see the harmonics of seven in all principles, and the fact that seven represents the repeat of the six, because you're going back into that center or that core again. So if you're really wanting to understand what this means, you'd go in and you'd study the hieroglyphic monad. I think it's, am I wrong to say it's Dr. Turner? I think I just put a post on community posts with what she's working on now. And the hieroglyphic of the monad, and to see what John Dee was really thinking about and why he was postulating and proposing a mathematical sequence that could actually help us develop our souls.